Welcome to Defining Moments. At the 2016 Global Leadership Summit, Erin Meyer, professor at INSEAD and author of The Culture Map, identified a systematic approach to decode the cultural differences we face in an increasingly globalized economy. In this Defining Moments, Jeff Lockyer, lead pastor of Southridge Community Church in St. Catharines, Ontario, joins us interviewing Bill Hybels about how to lead people with cultural differences. As we begin this conversation, think about the cultures around you. Do you allow those cultures to enrich your life?
Hey everybody, welcome to another edition of Defining Moments, where I get to have a conversation with Bill about some content from the GLS. Now, Bill, I'm just going to warn you because we're digging into Erin Meyer's summit talk. This was one of my favorite talks from this last summit. So let's dive into a clip from that talk, and then we're going to unpack it together. Can't wait.
We are here to talk about how cultural differences impact our effectiveness when we're working internationally. And I'm going to start by giving you two examples about my own clients and how they struggled with this topic. So the first one is about a Chinese client that I worked with. His name was Bo Chen. And Bo was living in Beijing, and for the first time, he was hired by a company outside of China. He was hired by a company in London. He was really excited. He was hired because he had excellent English. He was very extroverted. And when he got the first opportunity to come to a meeting in London, he prepared. He prepared the entire trip from Beijing to London. Then he arrived, he greeted all of his British colleagues. He said, "Thank you very much for having invited me." But then during the actual meeting, Bo said nothing at all. At the end of the meeting, he got up again, he shook hands again with his colleagues, and then as he was leaving the room, he accidentally overheard one of his British colleagues saying to another colleague, "Well, certainly seems like Bo has nothing to add." Right? Okay, that's your first situation. We'll come back to it later. The second situation is about a French woman I worked with. Her name was Sabine. When I worked with Sabine, she was living in Paris, but she was just about to be expatriated here. She was moving to Chicago. So I spent some time with her before she moved, helping her think about how she might adapt her style to this American context. And then after she'd been in Chicago for 4 months, I did a pre-scheduled follow-up call, first with her new American boss, John. And I asked John, "How are things going for Sabine?" He said to me, "Erin, it's not going well." He said, "The problem is that I've spoken with Sabine about these things she needs to change several times, and I've seen zero effort on her part to make these changes." He said, "If she doesn't start working on this soon, I don't think this expatriation is going to work out." I did, he told me, have my first performance review with Sabine last week, and I was again very clear with her. So I'm hoping to see some effort soon. So I got off the phone with John, and I called Sabine, and I said, "How are things going in the US?" And Sabine said to me, "They are going great." She said, "Erin, for the first time, I found a job that takes advantage of all of my talents." She said, "Erin, I have to tell you, I had my first performance review with my new boss last week, the best performance review I've had in my career." Right? Okay, now these two individuals both had cultural differences impact their effectiveness without even knowing it.
All right. Well, Bill, I found this session tremendously helpful. So let's start off and just get your initial reactions when you first heard this talk.
It was one of my favorite of the entire summit. And I started traveling internationally when I was 15 years old and have been curious about other cultures ever since. And because the summit is in so many different countries now, I do quite a bit of traveling. And I see the I see the nuances that she was discussing. I see the issues that she was raising. I was in the front row taking notes. I went to her lunch the next day, and she was every bit as mesmerizing and helpful at the lunch as she was on the main stage.
In your years of international travel, what are some of the lessons that you've learned kind of over time in these experiences about global cultures and just navigating some of those differences?
So I have one supreme law when it comes to international travel. And you wouldn't think that it could be universally helpful, but at this stage in my life, I still claim it is. And that is humility. Humility, in my view, is transcultural. If you show up humble, and if you ask questions sincerely and humbly, if you admit that you don't know something, if you express curiosity as to why that happened without any air of we do it better, humility bridges so many of these chasms that cause all the trouble. So I go in with the top value being humility and the second value being servanthood. How can I serve you? And I don't know how I can serve you. I come here with no presuppositions of how I could serve you. So could you tell me if there's any way that I could serve you? Because if I can't, how can you serve me? I mean, but I like to keep it at these hierarched levels, humility and servanthood, because if you don't take that approach, then you have to be a student of every single culture, and you have to read the books of every single culture, and you have to obey the top 6 rules in every single culture. I go to too many countries with too much rapidity that I couldn't possibly master all of these nuances.
So let me just press into that for all of us for a moment, because I think that might be a bit counterintuitive. So often, and what I appreciated about Erin's talk is that she was putting language to some of these unspoken cultural differences. So often, though, and it was illustrated in the clip that we watched, you experience these cultural differences, you don't have language for it, and because you don't have language for it, you just let it exist. And you're saying in the humble posture, you'll actually just curiously ask questions. If you feel something's off, or you're wondering how you're tracking, or you'll just humbly ask and not be worried about how you appear.
First time we had a major meeting of religious leaders in Moscow. They thought they were ready to put on the Global Leadership Summit. I sat around a table of people who were heads of denominations and different kinds of churches, and I could feel the tension in the room before I even was seated. And the meeting was awkward at many, many levels. And near the end, someone said with quite a bit of authority, I think it's all going to go just fine. I think we're ready. And so I raised my hand until they acknowledged me. And I said, gang, maybe it's just me. I have felt a spirit of uneasiness throughout this whole meeting. And I wish we could just rewind all the way back, and I wish we would not have skipped the part of, who are you? What church did you build? When did you come into a relationship with God? I wish I knew all of your stories, because I think if we understood each other's stories better, there'd probably be a little different spirit in the room. And that competitive edge, that almost hostility that was in the room, went down a notch and down a notch. And then I said to them, look, I'm not doing anything for dinner tonight. I mean, I am staying the night here. This was a lunch meeting. And I said, I would be more than willing to host a little dinner, and we could tell each other how we found God and how Christ came into our lives and these kinds of things. And so by that value, there was probably sincerity more than it was, humility or servanthood. It was just raising my hand saying, are we all okay in this room? So again, I go back to humility and servanthood and sincerity. If you can operate out of that core, you can bridge troubled waters often, not every time.
Yeah, I just so appreciate when you're feeling something funky, you're not just letting it sit there. You're curiously, even if it makes you look silly, you're checking in on it, right? And defaulting that way. That's great. Any other advice that you would have for any of us who are just in the early stages of getting into more multicultural or global type of working environments or ministry?
Yeah, there's kind of a mental framework that I carry whenever I'm going to go into a country I've never been in. It's so deep in those of us who live in North America. It's so deep that we are the advanced civilization, that we have figured it out. Well, so I've learned some very tough lessons. If I do have the time to do a little homework, to figure out, before I enter that country, what was it that devastated this country? Why are they 100 years behind the rest of the world? And usually, not always, usually it's someone in Europe or some colonialist who took advantage of this country because of its resources or something 100 years ago, and then left it in chaos. And so, in fact, they are about 100 years behind, but not because they're not smart. It was because they had been dominated.
Right. They were victimized.
Exactly. They were oppressed. Yeah. So we push them in a hole 100 feet deep, and we go, how come you're not building skyscrapers? So I try to always check my mindset going into every country. If it's not quite as advanced as ours, I go, there's a reason, and it's probably not because of stupidity. It's probably because of oppression of some kind. And once I get my head around that, and you know this because we've talked about it before, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, one of the most screwed up countries on the planet, Leopold of Belgium in the 1800s brutalized the country, came down, and some reports have it that he killed 3 million laborers, worked them to death, and would always herd up another several 100,000 who would step right in when another worker fell over and died. And he just looted that country, brought all the wealth back to Belgium. If you go to Belgium today, you see all these beautiful buildings and bridges and statues and all that. That's wealth from the Congo. Well, then when they finally got chased out, now the Congolese leaders all fight each other, and they've never run a country, and all the wealth has been compromised. And so it's a 100-year rebuild, but it wasn't their fault.
Right. Again, the humility value making you a student rather than someone who's assuming, drawing conclusions when you walk in. That's fabulous. Bill, a lot of us may not get into global, multicultural type environments, but these days, especially in urban centers like the Chicagoland area and Europe, you find yourself in groups and in teams that have global multiculturalism as a part of it. As you've grown as a leader, how has your leadership had to change, even domestically and even here at Willow, as you've learned to navigate those global cultural differences, even at home?
Yeah, so again, mental framework is so important to me as a leader. And if my mental framework is, middle-aged Dutch guy, who's led some things, is obviously the smartest person in the room, everybody catches that vibe. And if I go into a room and I say, there's some interesting people from other cultures and ethnicities and so in this room, and I'm going to go in with a curious attitude. What is your story like? And what food do you folks eat? And what holidays do you celebrate? Tell me about you. In very short order, I can get down to the level of community very, very quickly. So on the way into work this morning, in the hallways of one of Willow's office buildings, there were some workers working, putting some ceiling tiles in. I could hear them having a conversation as I came up the stairs. And they looked at me, and I thought, they probably think I'm a leader here. I don't know if they know I'm the pastor, but, I was coming up to a third-floor office. And so as I was approaching them, they stopped talking right away. And I said, guys, was that German or Polish you were speaking? And they said, it was Polish. Do you speak German? I said, no, I don't. But I was just taking a wild guess. And they said, no, we were speaking Polish. And I said, well, did you come from Warsaw or Krakow or where? And these kinds of things. Well, we wound up having a very sweet conversation for 4 or 5 minutes. These are, blue-collar workers doing ceiling tiles, If you have the framework in your mind to be humble and curious about every different culture, every different language group, I go into these situations feeling that other cultures enrich me. They don't scare me. They don't diminish me. They enrich me.
I want to press into that a little bit because especially when you're in a working, functional team environment, these unspoken cultural differences can sometimes feel like there are right ways and wrong ways to do things, to speak up or to, submit. And so how have you navigated that intuitive default to sort of label those as, well, there's a right way versus a not right way, and embrace some of the cultural diversities?
It's a great question, Jeff. And on some things, I take it out of the culture realm altogether. If someone is consistently tardy, if they're consistently late to a meeting that I lead, I have the conversation with them. I say, I don't care if you grew up in Brazil where everybody's late all the time. Okay, I frankly don't care. You are disrespecting your colleagues, and
at least around here.
Yeah, in this culture,
yeah,
where we're paying you a salary.
Yeah.
So if you consistently disrespect your colleagues, we're going to have a very difficult conversation. So now, if someone cracks jokes, or if there's other less defeating kinds of behaviors, it can actually liven up a meeting, and there can be nice joking and kidding around cultural differences.
Do you have any just intuitive or developed criteria on what those, what delineates those two kinds of cultural differences?
So we say around Willow, you've heard it many times, every interaction you have on a staff either builds culture or busts culture. There's almost no middle ground. So if someone's joking around in a meeting and it's building culture because it's truly humorous, and the humor is at no one's expense and it's not wasting time, and you say, well, that person's from this background where, it's a jovial culture they come out of, then you just say, thank God we have that good thing, that good part of their culture in our meeting. If it crosses that line and it wastes our time and it hurts people, digs people, or if it's covering something up, then we have to have that hard conversation. So you raise the right question. There are certain things that we need to respect culturally, really respect. And there are other things that we have to say, time out. This is transcultural. This is unacceptable behavior. I don't care where you're from,
In these environments where there's all kinds of this difference happening, whose job, at Willow, would you say, whose job is it to bridge those cultural divides?
Everybody's job. We all carry the responsibility, and we all feel the privilege. I want to keep reframing this. We don't bring a fearful attitude about different cultures around here. We just took a survey a couple months ago, learned that we have 103 countries represented at Willow now. 103 countries. So when you walk into our services, you feel it. You see it with the Eastern garb, and there's a whole bunch of stuff happening out there. And I pound this into Willow. I say, the differentness that we see enriches us. Be curious. Let's sing each other's songs. Let's eat each other's foods. Let's listen to each other's stories, because we are enriched by this. And if you finally drink that Kool-Aid, if you say, I'm actually going to look at differentness from sincere curiosity, it's so beautiful. I was up on the roof of Willow yesterday. We'd had a little roofing issue, and I had a break between meetings, and I thought, I want to go up and see this for myself. So I climbed up on the roof, and there was a Spanish-speaking foreman, and I thought, I'll bet he's about my age. And he had broken English, but I have terrible Spanish. So I talked to him about some of the issues we were having, and I said, how old are you? And he told me his age, and we're like 1 year apart. And I grabbed my phone and I said, I'll show you the pictures of my grandkids
yeah.
if you show me the picture of yours. And within 30 seconds, there was a kind of closeness between us. I'd never met him before. Different culture, different language. And he was looking at my grandkids, I was looking at his, and I said, we're blessed men, aren't we? He said, we are blessed men. He didn't know I was the pastor. He didn't, it was a sweet moment in both of our days. And if I would have said, well, there's someone obviously from a different culture and he doesn't speak English very well, so I'm going to stay away, I would have missed a beautiful moment. So I know I'm repeating myself, but differentness can enrich us in so many ways.
And senior leaders especially who are listening to this conversation, appreciate that while you may feel alone that it's sort of your job, it's not only your job. Your job is to make it everyone's job. That's what I'm hearing.
Yeah, cast the vision. And actually, it takes a conversion. You have to preach this vision of the beauty of diversity. You have to preach it until people reach out and try and then have some good experiences. So I've taught Willow on several occasions. I say, whenever you're anywhere, taxi cab, elevator, lobby, airport, and you hear someone speaking in a language you don't understand, or with a heavy accent, I said, I challenge you, if you have a few minutes to approach the person and say, you have a beautiful accent. What country are you from? I've done this thousands of times, and people go, oh, you noticed my accent? And I said, well, yeah, but it's beautiful. Well, where are you from? I've rarely had anyone say, hey, mind your own business. Usually they'll say, I'm from Lebanon, or I'm from here or there. And I go, oh, I've never been there, or oh, I've been there. And did you grow up there? How long have you lived here? And I love those conversations, as you can tell.
Oh, that's great. Want to shift gears a little bit, because some of us may not come from environments where there are 103 countries represented. And yet, in those seemingly homogeneous environments, we can still experience some of those unspoken cultural differences. What have you learned about mining out or creating language around cultural differences where you kind of assumed there would be no cultural differences?
Yeah, you're bringing up an insightful question. In a church of, let's say, 300 people, there could be some quite sophisticated intellectual business people. There could be some lower functioning people who are socially awkward. There could be some blue-collar workers, and there could be some academicians that are all sitting next to each other in the same church. And what usually happens is they seek out their own, because it's too hard to try to reach across that divide. So I've been trying my whole life to see what creative ways can we aggregate people so that the academicians can see the skill set of someone who works in the trades. I mean, people who work in the trades are really skilled people and very smart. They're intimidated by the academicians. The academicians often think, these people just work with their muscles, you see. If you can get them on a work project anywhere, send them on a short-term missions team where there's a doctor and a dentist, but there's also a carpenter and a plumber and a school teacher and someone else. They often come back from a 10-person serving trip with a whole new level of respect and appreciation for people in walks of life that they had never really encountered before or haven't for a long time. So putting them together in the right kind of situation can often help you cross those bridges.
Any other strategies other than just pooling them together and forcing them to be a group?
I think forcing doesn't often work. And that's why I like doing a common challenge together. We do these 5K runs or walks for refugees and we say, why don't you run or walk with someone that's different from you? Just get a partner who's different from you and enjoy running or walking for however long a time and get to know someone who maybe doesn't speak your language or doesn't look just like you. And often those are enriching experiences. Some people, Jeff, I don't know why this is true. Some people aren't ready, or they had a bad experience earlier in their life with someone from another culture, so their fear is so deep that they'll never kind of get out of their own little world. And I've worked very hard, and I take the long haul approach. I'm going to keep talking about the beauty of diversity. I'm going to keep telling you that in heaven there's going to be every language, tribe, culture, and tongue. And let's enjoy now what we're going to enjoy in heaven, you see. I keep trying to cast that vision so that people will at least try, because when you try, you gain a little confidence, and that usually helps you along the way.
Yeah, and the whole thing is around this vision of embracing the beauty of diversity. Now, for kind of the final set of questions that I've had as I was processing this talk, had to do with how much it was messing with my mind from a whole nother kind of stream of thought that has been developed in me through the summit. And that is on kind of cultural alignment. So on the one hand, Erin's encouraging us to embrace cultural diversity. Other summit faculty, I would think most commonly Pat Lencioni, has encouraged kind of clarifying things, singular cultural distinctives that you align around. When is culture diversity to be embraced versus, alignment to be expected?
Yeah. I don't think there's anything more powerful than a very diverse group of people aggregating around a very tight set of values. That's even more beautiful than people who are from one culture and country and language group aligning around a tight group of values. You're like, well, we're all alike anyway. We vote alike and we go to the same schools. What does unity around values really mean? We're all alike anyway. But boy, when you take people from all over the world or from different sides of the tracks, just someone who came from a wealthy background and someone who didn't, when you have a lot of diversity and you say, I call you, I challenge you to live out these 4 values as we work with each other every day, now you're making choices and you can feel it with your colleagues. We're choosing to bridge these divides. We're choosing to align around these values. To me, that's a very powerful soup to consume. That's the best kind of taste in my mouth, is that wide diversity, laser unified values.
Yeah. Now, in your leadership at Willow in the last 40 years or so, have you had any criteria or any practical way of kind of differentiating what those few, you're calling them values, kind of distinct from cultural distinctives, those values that you would galvanize around across cultures?
Well, so around Willow, we identify what behaviors are just going to be career enders. We're very upfront with people, and we say, no, if you're going to come and join our culture, here's 5
and
behaviors.
You've done that work.
Yep.
Pay attention to this, because this is the work to do.
And if you demonstrate arrogance, deceit, go right down the list, these are career enders. You might not even get a second strike if you hurt yourself too much or hurt the team too much along these lines. And so we're very clear about that, and we say, now, in our minds, we're saying, now, the culture you come from is loose with money. They, they make side deals and all that. We don't.
Not here.
Not here.
Yeah.
You're coming into this culture, and it's run by a Dutch guy who really watches money carefully. And if you misuse a church credit card, 9 out of 10, that's the only time you'll ever do that. We just don't mess with that, you see. So you get very clear on that side. What are the career enders? And then you say, what's going to make your life wonderful here? What's going to endear you to all of your colleagues? What's going to make you fit into our culture beautifully here? Just list those all out. This, of course, starts with humility, servant-mindedness, giving the credit to others, work is a privilege and all these things. And you say, just avoid these, embrace these, probably be fine.
Yeah, and the key thing for us to appreciate is that those terms that you're whistling off now, those don't just shake out of your sleeve over a lunch break.
Those required weeks of meetings.
Yeah, that's an off-site retreat.
It is, and it takes a lot of input. It's not; those aren't just my rules. We would have, half the staff around round tables, and we would just say, start writing down on pieces of paper. What can't you stand with your co-workers, fellow workers? What drives you up the wall? You don't want to come to work. You don't want to be around your department. Arrogance. In our culture, arrogance was the top of the list. There's zero tolerance for it.
Listen, Bill, thanks so much for engaging us in this conversation. I have so appreciated, especially over the last decade or so, how you've paid increasing attention, not just to the hard skills of leading, but to these softer dynamics of culture and cultural improvement. And I hope all of us are inspired to follow your lead, to not just promote that singularity around these values, but to really embrace, as you've envisioned today, the beauty of all of the diversity, not just of the body of Christ on earth, but of that picture that we're going to enjoy in heaven. Let's be inspired by that and go for it. Thanks so much for joining us. We'll see you next time on Defining Moments.
Do you recognize the cultures around you? Do you seek ways to humbly unite people while honoring cultural diversity? Take a few minutes to write down your thoughts. Remember to watch, listen to, and share defining moments with your team.